very happy to be back. And if you thought I was doing nothing but playing pickleball and golfing and lying on the beach, I spent most of my days in front of my computer screen on Zoom calls and meetings. And I would suggest that one of the most important things that I've done over the 5 months is help. I was part of the steering committee for the National Citizens Inquiry.
Yes.
And it felt like one of those experiences like out of a field of dreams where if you build it, they will come. Because when we began back in September meeting around the National Citizens Inquiry, we didn't know how we were going to do this. We didn't know how we were going to pull it off. We didn't know how we were going to finance it. We didn't know who was going to show up. And we were actually reluctant to announce the schedule across the country because we didn't know if we would be able to get past the first 1 or 2 inquiries because we didn't know if we could finance it. We even talked about the possibility of holding the entire inquiry virtually, again, because we didn't know if we could finance it because it was being financed by citizens for citizens. And the first one was in Toronto, Nova Scotia, and it went off well, but you know, there was about, Michelle, you probably know the number, maybe 30,000 impressions on social media. You know, it had very little impact. Of course, the mainstream media pretended it didn't exist. And so we thought, geez, are we going to make a difference? I can tell you that as of last week, we had, what, 10 million impressions on social media? And I just spent the last 3 days in Vancouver. I was the witness coordinator for Vancouver, and so I reviewed more than 150 applications of people that wanted to speak for 15 positions that we had available for lay people. We had another 15 positions available for experts, and we were able to secure incredible experts, Edward Dowd, Dr. Charles Hoff, Dr. Chris Shaw, an incredible outline of speakers. And then we had people that shared their story about vaccine injury, Sean Muldoon and Kristen Dizzle and James Jones, whose wife committed suicide, and that was the subject of the film Uninformed Consent. So we had incredible testimony. And my personal favorite was Dr. Charles Hoff, and if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to listen to it. That man speaks with such integrity and such humility. Every word that came out of his mouth was moved the audience there. We had standing room only in Vancouver. What became clear from the testimony is that this is the greatest crime against humanity, and they know it. This was not a mistake.
No.
It wasn't a misunderstanding. It's not as if they didn't know what they were doing. They knew. And the evidence is so compelling, whether it came from economists, doctors, virologists, law enforcement, lawyers. Everyone tells the same story, that these violations were clear, they were known, efforts of accountability, of educating, all of those took place, and the government and public health and the mainstream media refused to do the right thing. Thank God for all of you who know what is right and keep standing up for it, even though we're being run by criminals.
Criminals.
I want you to know that every mainstream media was invited, personally invited to the NCI. Every major politician, public health officer, anyone who was part of the mandates, imposing mandates, received a personal invitation to attend the NCI, and it was sent by registered mail. Not one of them showed up. The CBC showed up in Winnipeg for, what, 30 minutes and then left? I mean, if you're going to be there, why would you not stay and listen to the testimony? Clearly, they weren't there to hear the testimony. But I want to share, for those of you that may not have heard, the opening comments by Sean Buckley, who's the lead lawyer for the inquiry. And Sean is another example of somebody who's shown up and dedicated his life to this cause. You know, he was part of the initial steering committee that I was a part of, and he recognized that this was so important. He shut down his law practice, and he said, I'm going to be at every city taking on the responsibility for this inquiry. And so, God bless him. And I think it was in Toronto when he started having some opening comments, and then might be a couple of minutes, and then in Winnipeg it was a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And so when I was scheduling the testimony for Vancouver, I put him in for 15 minutes in the morning, and he said to me, Ted, that's not going to be long enough. And his talk started, opening comments started to be 20 minutes, and then 25, and then 30, and then 35 minutes. And he delivers these beautiful messages that is not about the testimony. It really is a sermon about where we are, what we're up against, and what we need to do. But his opening comments in Winnipeg touched me deeply, and I want to just share that story with you if you haven't heard it. And Sean talked about a life-transforming experience in his life when he was 12 years old. He was at his public library in his community, and he was watching black and white videos from World War II. And this particular video had no sound attached to it, but he said you could tell what was happening by just following what was going on. And it was where the German soldiers were rounding up citizens in the city and lining them up against a wall, and it was a firing squad. And he said you could see the soldiers line up the civilians along the wall, and then the soldiers stood in a line, and you knew that they were being given the command to raise their rifles, aim. And he said all of the soldiers raised their rifles and aimed except one. And so the order must have been given for them to lower their rifles, and the commander came over to the soldier that didn't raise his rifle, and there was a conversation that you could witness from the black and white screen. And then the soldier put his rifle on the ground, walked up to the wall with the citizens, and stood there with them.
Wow. Wow.
And the order was given to raise your rifles and fire, and they were all killed, including that soldier. And Sean Buckley, at 12 years old, decided that day that he wanted to be a soldier, just like that man that went and stood with the citizens. And I see all of you as that kind of soldier. We know there's something here much more important to fight for than our own life. We value freedom, we value honesty, we value integrity, we value morality, and we will go to our death to stand up for those things. And if there's a silver lining in this journey that we're on, is the beauty to meet all of you and to know that we stand for the highest good. And we will not be silenced, we will not step down, and we will not quit until we've reclaimed a free and democratic country. So thank you for all you do. Okay, that's enough. Maybe I'll just add is that I testified on Thursday, and I shared what we know from Vaccine Choice Canada about how the lack of safety and efficacy of the childhood vaccines. The theme of my speech was what's happening over the last 3 years is not new. It's been going on for decades. And I can tell you that I heard from people over and over and over again since Thursday who heard my testimony and said, I thought I knew it all. I've been in the medical system or whatever, and I learned things I never knew. And so we still have a job to do to educate people about how our medical system has been captured by the pharmaceutical industry. I want to introduce our next speaker. We're privileged to have this gentleman who's a beautiful soul, a beautiful warrior, and I feel like he's now my new brother. Vincent Gerses began this journey of the freedom movement back at Adamson's Barbecue when he attended it, when the police came in on force to shut it down. And at some point in that protest, Vincent got on the back of a pickup truck, and he spoke to the crowd, and he gave some words of encouragement to the crowd that was there protesting on behalf of Adamson's Barbecue. And then he spoke to the police officers, and he reminded them of their oath, and he asked them to follow their oath. Since then, Vincent went to Ottawa for the truckers' convoy. He became part of the leadership team there. You might have remembered he sat down with Danny Beaufort and who else was it, Vincent? Eddie Cornell, and delivered messages on behalf of the Freedom Convoy. Vincent has been a steadfast warrior for truth. He's come here to Kelowna to spend a little bit of time with us. We're privileged to have him. So Vincent, come and share your wisdom and your heart with us, too.